Hello and welcome to Kuma English Listening Hub. In today's episode, we are going to tackle a topic that is often emotionally charged, frequently misunderstood, and constantly in the headlines in the United Kingdom: legal and so-called illegal immigration. We will unpack the key legal terms, explore how the British media and politicians talk about migration, and listen to different perspectives from across the UK. Along the way, you will hear authentic British expressions and advanced vocabulary, so you can sharpen your C2 level listening skills while gaining a deeper understanding of a major social issue. So, put the kettle on, get yourself a proper cuppa, and let's get started. In Britain, immigration has become one of the defining political issues of the last 2 decades. From the 2016 Brexit referendum to the more recent debates about small boats in the English Channel, questions about who can come to the UK, on what basis, and with what rights are never far from the front pages. However, the language used in these debates can be rather confusing, and sometimes, frankly, a bit misleading. You will often hear the phrase illegal immigrant thrown around in tabloid headlines or in heated conversations down the pub. But from a legal and human rights perspective, this term is highly contested. Many lawyers and charities in the UK prefer the term irregular migrant or person with insecure immigration status, because being in a country without the right paperwork is usually an administrative issue, not a criminal one. In other words, people may be in breach of immigration rules, but that does not mean they themselves are illegal as human beings. That distinction is absolutely crucial. Let's first look at what we might call legal migration routes into the UK. Broadly speaking, there are several main categories. Work routes. Under the points-based system introduced after Brexit, people can apply for skilled worker visas, health and care visas, or other specialist schemes. Employers need a sponsor license, and migrants must usually meet salary thresholds and English language requirements. Study routes. International students come to British universities on student visas, often paying rather high fees. Many are keen on staying on after their degree using the graduate route, which allows them to work for a limited period. Family routes. British citizens and settled residents can sponsor close family members, such as spouses or children, although the financial requirements can be quite demanding. Protection routes. People fleeing war or persecution may apply for asylum. There are also specific resettlement schemes, for example, for people from Ukraine or Hong Kong. If everything is sorted properly, the forms, the fees, the biometric data, the sponsorship, then a person is considered to have leave to enter or leave to remain, which means they are lawfully present in the UK. Of course, in real life, the process is rarely straightforward. The paperwork can be daunting, the Home Office can take ages to make decisions, and even small errors can have serious consequences. Many migrants describe the system as quite hostile, borrowing the phrase from the government's own hostile environment policy, which we will come back to later. Now, what about people who are labeled as illegal immigrants? There are several ways in which someone can end up with irregular status in the UK. First, they may have entered the country without permission, for example, by crossing the channel in a small boat without a visa. Second, they may have entered legally, but overstayed their visa. Third, they may have had an application refused, but remained because they fear returning to their country of origin. In British law, these situations are generally framed as immigration offenses or breaches of immigration rules. They can lead to detention, removal, or a ban on re-entry. But it is important to stress that seeking asylum is not, in itself, illegal under the Refugee Convention, even if the person arrives by irregular means. Many legal experts in the UK argue that the constant use of the term illegal immigrant in politics and the media is, to put it mildly, not spot on. It tends to blur the line between criminality and administrative status, and it can feed stigma, discrimination, and even hate crime. If you watch British news bulletins, you have almost certainly seen footage of small inflatable boats in the English Channel. In recent years, the number of people taking this dangerous route has increased significantly. Most are seeking asylum, coming from countries such as Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Eritrea, or Sudan. For the UK government, these crossings have become a political priority. Ministers have pledged to stop the boats, arguing that people should claim asylum in the first safe country they reach, and that smugglers are exploiting vulnerable migrants. Critics, including many human rights organizations, take quite a different view. They argue that there are very few safe and legal routes for people to claim asylum in the UK. Without humanitarian visas or functioning resettlement programs, desperate people are pushed into the hands of smugglers. As one charity worker in Kent put it, if there were proper, safe routes, these boats would be gone tomorrow. The debate can get rather heated. Some commentators insist that the UK is being overrun, despite the fact that, per head of population, the UK takes fewer refugees than several other European countries. Others point out that Britain has a long history of offering refuge, from Jewish children arriving on the Kinder transport before the Second World War, to Ugandan Asians in the 1972 and Syrians in the 2010. To understand the distinction between legal and irregular status, we also need to look at how immigration control plays out in everyday life. In the early 2010s, the UK government introduced a set of measures known, quite bluntly, as the hostile environment. The idea was to make life so difficult for people without the right papers that they would be encouraged to leave voluntarily. Under these policies, landlords, employers, banks, and even doctors are drawn into checking immigration status. People without valid documents may be denied the right to work, rent, open a bank account, or access certain services. For many, it is not just inconvenient, it is utterly exhausting even, to use a British expression, completely knackered. The problem is that these measures have also hit people who are in fact in the UK legally. The most notorious example is the Windrush scandal. Members of the Windrush generation, people from Caribbean countries who came to Britain between the late 1940s and early 1970s, suddenly found themselves challenged to prove their status decades after they had arrived as citizens of the UK and colonies. Some were wrongly classified as illegal immigrants, lost their jobs or homes, and were even detained or removed. The government later apologized, and an official review concluded that the Home Office had shown institutional ignorance and thoughtlessness towards Black Britons. For many, this episode was a blimey moment, exposing how harsh immigration control can become when bureaucracy trumps basic fairness. Debates about legal and irregular migration in the UK are not only about law, they're also about economics, public services, and cultural identity. On the economic front, several studies, including reports from the Office for Budget Responsibility, suggest that migration tends to boost growth and tax revenues, particularly when migrants are working in high-skill or high-demand sectors. The NHS, social care, hospitality, and agriculture all rely heavily on migrant labor. Opponents of high migration levels argue that rapid population growth can put pressure on housing, schools, and GP surgeries. In areas where public services have already been pared back after years of austerity, any additional demand can feel like the last straw. Residents may feel that their concerns are dismissed by metropolitan politicians who, in their view, are rather out of touch. Supporters of a more open approach reply that it is not migrants themselves who are the problem, but political choices about funding and investment. If social housing, public transport, and local services were properly resourced, they argue, migration could be managed in a way that is fair on both newcomers and long-term residents. Culturally, immigration has reshaped British towns and cities. From the curry houses of Birmingham's Balti Triangle to the Afro-Caribbean communities of Brixton and the Polish shops in small market towns, modern Britain is, as many people say, super or diverse. For some, this is brilliant, a source of creativity, new ideas, and delicious food. For others, it can prompt anxiety about national identity, social cohesion, and the role of English as a shared language. The way the British media talk about immigration plays a huge role in shaping public opinion. Tabloid newspapers like The Sun or the Daily Mail have historically run front pages warning of floods or swarms of migrants, particularly from Eastern Europe after the 2004 EU enlargement. Broadsheets like The Guardian or the Financial Times tend to use more cautious language, often highlighting human stories or economic analysis. Political parties also frame the issue differently. Recent conservative governments have promised to bring down net migration and toughen enforcement, including controversial plans to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda. Opposition parties, such as Labour and the Liberal Democrats, criticize aspects of these policies, but are often careful not to be portrayed as soft on borders. Across the spectrum, the phrase illegal immigrant still pops up. Some politicians use it deliberately to sound tough, knowing it will land well with certain voters. Others are more circumspect, speaking instead of people with no right to be here. For advanced English learners, paying attention to these nuances can be fascinating. The choice between illegal, irregular, undocumented or with insecure status is not just about vocabulary, it is about values, ideology, and the power of labels. It is easy to talk about immigration in the abstract numbers, charts, policy papers, but behind every label there is a person with a story. Imagine, for example, a young nurse from Nigeria who comes to the UK on a health and care visa, working night shifts on an understaffed ward in an NHS hospital in Manchester. Her status is perfectly legal, but she may still encounter racism, job insecurity, or hostile comments about foreign nurses taking British jobs, even though the hospital would struggle to function without her. Now picture a teenager from Afghanistan who arrives in a dinghy on the Kent coast after months of traveling through multiple countries. His journey is irregular, and the Home Office may try to send him back to a safe third country. But from his point of view, he is simply trying to survive and build a future in a place he associates with safety and the rule of law. These two individuals sit on different sides of the legal irregular divide, yet both are caught up in the UK's immigration system and the wider public debate. For teachers, social workers, and local councils, helping them integrate into schools, workplaces, and communities is a very real, very practical challenge. So, where does this leave us? In sober moments, many British commentators acknowledge that migration policy inevitably involves trade-offs. On the one hand, the state has the right and the responsibility to control its borders and to decide who can live and work on its territory. On the other hand, there is a long British tradition of fairness, compassion, and respect for individual rights. Students of politics sometimes talk about a trilemma here. You cannot simultaneously have completely open borders, strict numerical caps, and full respect for every individual's preferences. Something has to give. For some people, the priority is sovereignty and control. For others, it is upholding international obligations and humanitarian values. Still, others are primarily concerned with economic competitiveness, skills shortages, and the demographic realities of an aging population. A balanced perspective might be that the UK needs a properly managed, rules-based system that is both firm and fair, one that distinguishes clearly between criminal activity, such as trafficking, and the mere fact of being out of status. That creates safe routes so people are not forced into small boats, and that invests in communities so that rapid change does not leave residents feeling sidelined. It is hardly a walk in the park, but that is the sort of grown-up conversation many people in Britain are calling for. Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to reflect on the language you have heard in this episode. Today, you have encountered a range of advanced expressions and vocabulary, including hostile environment, a specific British policy term linked to immigration enforcement, insecure immigration status, and irregular migrant, more neutral alternatives to illegal immigrant, net migration, points-based system, and resettlement schemes. Key policy concepts, idiomatic expressions such as spot on, fair enough, keen on, to be knackered, and blimey moment. At C2 level, you are not just learning individual words. You are learning how to interpret tone, stance, and subtext. When you hear a politician on the radio talking about cracking down on illegal immigration, ask yourself, what exactly do they mean? Which groups are they referring to? Are there alternative ways of framing the issue? Listening critically, rather than just passively, is what will really move your English into that genuinely advanced territory. We are nearly at the end of today's episode, so let's bring things together. Legal and irregular migration in the UK is not a simple black and white issue. It involves complex laws, emotional public debates, and, above all, real people whose lives are shaped by decisions in Westminster and by attitudes on the street. Next time you hear someone on a British talk show saying, "We have got to get rid of all the illegal immigrants," you will be able to unpack the terminology, question the assumptions, and perhaps offer a more nuanced, better informed view. That is, in many ways, what C2 level English is all about. Not just fluency, but sophistication of thought. If you found this episode useful, you might like to listen again, focusing this time on pronunciation and intonation. You could also pause after key sections and summarize them out loud, or jot down new vocabulary in a notebook and create your own example sentences. Thanks very much for listening to Kuma English Listening Hub. You are doing a brilliant job pushing your English to a higher level. Keep going, stay curious, and I will see you in the next episode. Cheers for now.